In 1976, my partner and I decided we would make a trip to Italy, to Europe. She had a background, Italian family. She had grown up in New York. Very different culture than the Midwest, and we had a very tumultuous relationship. It was the best and the worst all wrapped up together. It was very difficult, but we went to Italy, and we had the same kind of relationship throughout Italy and Europe. It was both the best. It was wonderful in many respects, but it was also very difficult at times. We ended the trip by staying over in London, and we had an afternoon before our flight was leaving the next day. And I told this friend of mine, I said, look, a friend told me, one of our graduate students told me that I should check out the Spiritualist Society if I'm ever in London. And I said, well, why is that? He said, oh, check it out. You might find it interesting. So I said, let's go. So we did. We went over to the Spiritual Society. We found it. We sat in a large auditorium, church-like space for a demonstration lecture, which was interesting, informative. And as we're heading out the door and leaving, we saw a poster on the wall that said, Helen is giving a reading at 3 o'clock. I think it was $2 a piece. And I said, oh, let's do it. Yeah. So it's a little after 2. So we ran up the stairs, got into this room, and Helen is there with 3 other women. So there are 6 of us in the room. And Helen, as we opened the door, we apologized for being a few minutes late. She says, not a problem. She said, have you ever had a reading before? And we said, no. Oh, before we said no, she answered the question. She said, no, you haven't. Okay, we sat down, and Helen starts to talk to one of the women, and she said before the reading, she said, look, I'm just going to tell you what I know and see. You don't have to ask me any questions. I'll just give you a reading. Oh, all right. So she started with the first woman, and I am immediately impressed by her professionalism. I'm immediately impressed by the way she coaches information in a way that would inform the listener without giving away personal information to the rest of us. And as she goes to the second and the third person, I am very impressed by the way she handles this. She also talked to these 3 women in terms that were rather pragmatic and practical. Like, maybe you should not move yet, or you should maybe go to the hospital later. Things like this. And then it was my turn. And she started talking about the way I organize information to start a project that's in my case, as a photographer and artist, how I organize my thoughts to begin a project and give it some basis. You know, my philosophy of art. And I am sitting there rather dazzled. I mean, this was not expected. And she was very specific. And then she said something to the effect that was even more astonishing. She said, I see you make pictures. And I immediately think, oh, she thinks I'm a painter. And of course, in those days, photography was black and white. And the next thing that comes out of her mouth is, you should consider color. She has me entirely won over now. And she says, I see a long project, a year-long project you're starting this next year. I received a Bush Foundation grant and a sabbatical. Now I'm thinking, I just walked off the street. I've never met this woman in my life. And she's telling me stuff. And she said, I see at the end of the year professorship. I was in line for a professorship, which did occur. She knew it before it occurred. And by now I am thinking, this woman is amazing. How does she know this? She asked me if I'd ever had a relative in the military. And I said, well, not an immediate relative, no. She said, because I think I see you have a spirit guide. You have a spirit guide that's telling me this information. Okay. Now, next to me is this colleague, this partner, you know, she was actually my wife at the time. And Helen looked at me and she said, Do you have any questions? Would you like to ask me anything? And of course, I want to ask her. I'm trying to formulate a question that will address the main issue between us without with the subject sitting next to me. And so I hesitate and I think about it, and she looks at me, she said, your ideals of love are correct. She answered the question. And I thought, if I lived in London, I'd be seeing Helen on a regular basis. we'd have a relationship. So she went on to my partner at the time, and she began to tell her what was going to happen. And she was correct on every respect. So that left me thinking that there are other ways people communicate. There are other dimensions. There are other things that I'm not aware of. I don't know. There is no way a stranger could have given us back that much information so precisely and exactly as she did that day. And I still remember Helen. I'll never forget her advice either.